My name's Katie Ruku. I'm a senior lecturer at the University of St Andrews in the School of Geography and Sustainable Development.
Yes, I'm Eurydice Honorio. I also currently as a NERC fellow. I have a NERC fellowship at the University of St Andrews, as well as a similar school of Geography and Sustainable Development. During the development of this research project, I was based at IAP, the Peruvian Amazon Research Institute, where I have been used to work for a few decades.
And I'm Paul Muntz. I'm the Chief Scientific Advisor at the Department of Business, Energy, Industrial Strategy, and I'm going to be your host today to have a kind of conversation about what you did in this project and what we learned from it. So it's great to meet both of you. Welcome today to today's kind of webinar. So let's get started and get into a little bit of what this was all about. What problems you were trying to address? I don't know who's going to go first. Katie or Eurydice?
Start off with that one. Yeah, so about the problem that we were trying to address. Basically, our research is about peatlands in the tropics, and this particular project is about the effects that resource use by local communities has on those peatlands. So maybe it helps a little bit to go back to why peatlands are important, particularly why peatlands in the tropics are important. So I'll do a bit of basics, and then maybe Eurydice can talk a little bit more detail about these specific ecosystems and peoples that we're interested in. So peatlands, they occur in many places around the world: high altitude, low altitude, high latitude, low latitude. So we know peatlands from the UK. They're also very abundant in the tropics, which actually only became really evident in the last few decades to science anyway. And they form wherever the ground is wet, waterlogged for a good part of the year, preferably year round. And what happens is that waterlogging, primarily, the waterlogging slows down the rate of decomposition of plant matter, and that allows organic matter to accumulate over time. So over thousands of years, you can get meters and meters of organic matter accumulating over time. So they're important as ecosystems, these environments. They contribute to global biodiversity. They're important habitats for wildlife, as resources for people. So we know about Ireland and Scotland and other treeless places. People have, for years and still do in places, use peat as a fuel. Not in the tropics because there are plenty of trees, but we're familiar with this use of peat as an important resource. And really, I think maybe one of the key things on a global scale, they're important because they're carbon stores. So they're taking carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere and locking it up below ground in vast quantities, and have been doing so since the end of the last glaciation.
So super. I mean, so that's peat. Very important global carbon store, but particularly important in the tropics, I guess, because of the growth rate and accumulation rates must be higher there, are they, in the tropics?
No, it's a funny thing. You might think so, but because it's warmer, there's a balance. So there's higher productivity, which kind of balances out the fact that it's warmer and therefore should be decaying faster. So actually, if you compare accumulation rates from one place to another, it's often around about a meter per year. No, a meter per 1,000 years. Well, a meter per year, what? No, it's more like a meter per 1,000 years. Yeah.
Well, that's really interesting. Yeah, because I mean, that is slightly counterintuitive, isn't it? In that sense, you again, I guess if you just think of primary productivity. I was talking to Eurydice just before this, actually, about life in Peru. So she was telling me a lot about the rain, which obviously is a key factor here, Eurydice, for this. But what was the particular reason for looking at the Peruvian piece and the interactions around that?
Yes. I can really tell a bit more about the project related to the problem that we try to address. And one of the peatlands, the main peatland ecosystem in Peru, is dominated by a palm called Mauritia flexuosa. And so this palm occurs naturally in high abundance. But local people, to be able to use the fruits that are economically important to them, they cut the palms. So that means that the forest gets degraded because of this intense harvesting. So we were aware that the demand of these fruits is increasing nationally and internationally. So these ecosystems are in threat. not due to this increment in the demand. And what we are trying to address is to understand what this impact of the harvesting is doing on the forest, and in particularly on biodiversity, on carbon sequestration, on the livelihoods of people.
So it's that kind of holistic approach, both of the ecology and the social impacts that go together, which is a particularly important feature, I suspect, of this. And what's the scale of deforestation then, or harvesting of this sort of fruit?
Yeah, well, it's not very obvious because the people do not cut the whole forest, because this palm is like human beings, it's a dioecious species, so that means they have female and male individuals. So people only target the female individuals, but they remove a portion of them. And so what you still see there is kind of the forest is still standing there, but the economic value is lost. Wow. So that is what is intriguing us, because in biomass they might not be losing much biomass and carbon, but compared to the economic value, these places is a previous step to deforestation. They lose the economic value, and so they become useless for people, and they could cut them for the uses. Yeah, so that is what we were trying to prevent.
That's quite subtle in a way, isn't it? It's quite a subtle, because you think of deforestation as massive, but actually it's kind of an economic deforestation in some senses, which is slightly different in this.
Yeah, can I also put something maybe to add, is that you're quite right. Yes, subtle is a great word for that, and also cryptic, because you can't necessarily see, maybe the peat below the ground is not immediately obvious. So the size of the carbon store is not immediately obvious. And also this degradation, it's a kind of a degradation of the resource base. But yeah, it's hard to see without really going in there and talking to people and looking at and measuring what's going on.
So that probably brings us to, well, what did you do then? How did you get in there, and what research did you design in order to do that? I don't know who wants to go first, Eurydice or Katie. I don't know.
Want me to start with a sort of an overview, and Eurydice can maybe do detail more of the mixed nature of this. So the ecology, the peatland science, the mapping, but also the need to understand the socio-economic circumstances, the way that's changing, the local culture, which is all tied up with the ecosystems on the peatlands that people are using. We needed a really interdisciplinary team to do this. So our approach had to be totally interdisciplinary. So we got together a team which was included obviously groups from Peru and people from the UK as well. And we got together and had this much more holistic approach than would be normal, to be honest, and than had been our approach in the past, where Eurydice and I had worked for a long time just from the scientific perspective, not really incorporating the social science side of things. So that was quite a new thing about this project for us and for the institutions involved.
Right, so how did that translate on the ground then, Eurydice?
Yes, well, what we did in the field, it was trying to find these places. We decided to choose sites where you can see high degradation and medium and low degradation. And the way that we target to assess this status of the forest, the health of the forest, is by measuring the sex ratio of Mauritia flexosa. As I said before, it's like in a natural environment, you will find 50% of males and 50% of female Mauritias in there. So when we can see that this ratio is changing, like a lot of males and not many females, that means it's highly degraded. And in those sites that are more conserved, that people have not been harvesting, you get a ratio 1-1, no? One male by one female. So we started doing this, assessing that in the forest, coming with local people telling us where they were harvesting. So we assess, and it really matched. They said this forest hasn't been harvested. You go there and you get 1-1, no? And great, this is a good site for low degradation. And you go no other places. And so in this way, we sampled 3 very different communities. No, one was inside a protected area where they have a lot of regulations on how the harvesting must occur. And there the people tend to climb the palms so they don't cut. So degradation was medium to low. And this is because also you get historical degradation. Also, before the reserve was formed, where the people were cutting the palm there. And then we also had a scenario within an indigenous communities, and there it was generally low degradation because the amount that they cut inside these forests is quite low because it's just for consuming the population, just a small population and consuming these resources. So it's not much where they take out from the forest. And then one side that was outside protected areas and was a kind of more big community, 3,000 people living there. And there we got like sites with medium to high degradation. So, and there in each place, we set up permanent plots to assess the diversity of the vegetation, also camera traps and transects to see what wildlife is in there in terms of mammals. And we measure how much peat is stored below ground by measuring that peat depth or thickness. And as well, the social teams were also involved in the assessment with some activities, interviews, talking to people, and trying to get insights about how they see, they have been living in this place for decades, how they perceive degradation and how this is impacting their livelihoods.
Yeah, it's really interesting about the kind of that pulling that total kind of picture together is actually really an important part of this, and actually that there are such contrasting areas around.
Yes.
I'm bound to ask you in a minute about sustainability, but I think we're just going to take a little bit of a diversion for a second before we get to the impact of the research and just talk a little bit, because we're quite interested, people do science, and we're quite interested in the people who are doing this as well as the results of the project. So what personally drives, I'll go to Eurydice first on this one. Eurydice, what personally drives you to do this sort of work?
In my case, I was working in Peru already in the middle of the Amazon. So my institution was focusing all the research on the wetlands, and these palm swamps are wetlands. And one side of the wetland that by extreme waterlogged and always with a lot of water in the soils. And they were studying this ecosystem because most of the people in the Amazon live next to rivers and they depend on the resources. Yeah. I started trying to apply what I knew about, because my background came from botany, learning about plants and identifying them. So I saw a little gap, and there were not many people working in these swamps because they were tough environments. You sink, it's a nightmare being there. But it's really interesting because not many people are studying there, were not studying this ecosystem in the past. So I started kind of filling that gap and getting all my excitement there and convincing my colleagues as well to join my team. And in the same way, when I was doing my PhD in the UK, I convinced Katie to come as well to the Amazon and explore the peatlands, because at that time we were just learning and discovering scientifically that these ecosystems accumulated peat. So it was interesting. I was in the right moment.
It's often the way, isn't it? It's taking that knowledge, isn't it? Saying, I want to take it somewhere else. I want to do something new. And quite exciting. I can hear in your voice the excitement when you talk about it. So Katie, she took you along. What was your motivation?
So I'm really interested in, at that time, I was really interested in a long-term ecology. So dynamics of vegetation over long time periods, and I mean really long. So, ice age cycles, past interglacials, how vegetation responds to climate change. And I'd been working in Iceland, in Greece, off Portugal, a range of different places. But we were working in Leeds at this time and getting interested in the tropical environments and the big ecological questions that they were trying to answer. And it so happens that peat, which accumulates in these swamps, is able to record its own history. So it has pollen produced by the vegetation which grows in it, and it preserves it and accumulates over time. So it's making a record of its own history. And so we applied to NERC, in fact, in the first instance for a small grant to address a quite different question. And we got 6 months of funding. And so we went to Peru, and Eurydice dragged us into a swamp. It's not quite that bad. It was terrible conditions, but we took the longest call we could, and we started a combined sort of paleo-ecological, so long-term ecology, present-day ecology project, and that was the start of this. And then kind of over the years we've started thinking about the value of the peatlands in terms of their carbon and, you know, not just their history, but in terms of their carbon stores. Why are they important now? Why are they important for climate change mitigation? And then so more recently, 2018, we got our first bit of funding for doing a project about why they matter to people. So why are they important to the people who live there? And yeah, that's where this work kind of came from, really.
So it's been quite a journey. So how many years have you been working together on this then?
On that project, it was in 2010.
Wow.
Yeah,
okay.
That first project was 2010.
That we went to Peru, but I met Katie a few years earlier when I was doing my master course in the UK as well.
So I mean, it's been longer than a decade-long commitment to kind of building up the knowledge and the work and the working relationships that drive this sort of work. Oh, that's really interesting.
And our involvement from the UK perspective was completely dependent on the Peruvian infrastructure, the Institute YAP there, and Eurydice's expertise and her colleagues. Yeah.
Well, we'll get to the international aspects in a minute. But let's kind of return to the main story. So that's kind of your personal motivations. I think, which I take as wading around swamps really seems to be the take-home message there. But I think that we were talking about the story of what you were doing there and the insights that you were gaining. So what did you find? What were the results? What was the impact of the research? I don't know who wants to start, Katie or Eurydice.
I could just tell first about what we found in terms of biodiversity, because we were assessing these ecosystems, and we found out that highly degraded places got more species of plants. And we were kind of
highly degraded, got more species of plants.
More species.
Right, okay, more counterintuitive then,
Yeah. We weren't expecting that, but then of course, it's obvious because you remove in a swamp. They are very tough environments, so there are monospecific. There are few species that grows there. So when you remove quite a lot of one species, so there is a space, and the species that were entering into this forest, they were more diverse. Were trees mainly, but what we discovered is that they are light demanding trees, that they grow really fast and they don't have any economic value. So it was a positive thing from that. If you just measure an index of biodiversity, but it's really bad for the people because these species do not have any use, or at least economic use. So it's kind of, well, it's good but bad. And in the fauna as well, like animals, it was similar. We got more species, but very small species that were smaller, like rodents, and the people were not very keen on hunting them. So it was kind of, well, it's degraded. There is more number of species, but for local people that is not great. The quality is lost. That they prefer larger animals, larger mammals that they can harvest and hunt. And in terms of carbon, that was interesting because the forest hasn't been cut totally. We found out that biomass is replaced. These caps are replaced by all the trees, and the above ground biomass, the biomass on the trunks and leaves, is still the same, similar. It's not affected. And below ground carbon as well, the peat depth was more or less similar in every place. But that is just because these places are still a bit distant from roads and big infrastructure. But as soon as roads enter into these places, because the economic value has been lost, these are prone to deforestation. So we need to create awareness, that these are indices, these are problems, we need to find solutions to these before great development start in these places, and we end up having a big problem, like emitting more carbon because if these forests get cut, or the carbon that is sequestered in these places, and it's quite a lot, start being released to the atmosphere. And in terms of the social science, probably Katie could tell us about what the social group found on these places. Yes.
Well, I think probably the most fundamental thing is that those people know what's going on. They're really aware that the places which are degraded, they're really aware that they're having to go further and further to get to the resources that they need. So in the places where they cut the trees, over the years they say, right, well, we're losing this resource, we need to do something about it. And in a couple of places that we visited, they're starting to kind of off their own initiative begin to plant. So they'll maybe be planting Mauritia trees in their garden, right by the house. Sometimes planting a companion tree, so which enables you to climb and to harvest the fruits, but without the kind of the technical climbing gear that the projects have been implementing. Yes, gosh, and gosh, so many big changes across for those communities, especially the indigenous ones. This is more like broader context than a very specific thing to this project, but something that we found through these interviews and things is about that contrasting the indigenous people with the rural communities who have arrived more recently, is that they haven't been dependent on money. They don't really have a cash economy, but it's coming, right? Partly because of the presence of the oil exploitation, which is encroaching. And so that's coming, and it's completely changing the way that they interact with their environment, because it could mean that they start to want to exploit more of this fruit, particularly this fruit, which they harvest by cutting trees down. So even if at the moment what they're doing is sustainable, there's a change potentially coming. Do you see what I mean? So it's quite important.
I think this I've tried to pull out what the sustainability message is here in a way from your research, because there's I mean, it's been a really kind of fascinating conversation so far, because a lot of it, you know, sometimes you go, I expected to go to a conversation which was, you know, peat storage going down, peat degraded, you know, chopping trees down, bad, but actually the conversation is, this is a lot more nuanced and a lot more balanced and a lot more hidden than you would do it. And if you and it's sort of the question by, I think, Katie, that's kind of why you're stalling. What is the metric of success here for this, let's call it ecosystem, and in its largest sense, and the way that people interact with it? Because there's all these sort of conflicting uses, and it'd be easy to say, I don't think you're kind of hedging your bets a little bit. It'd be easy to say, well, actually, what we need to do here is sustainable agriculture. This is a sustainable agriculture problem, where if and you really see us shaking our head.
No, yes, exactly.
Because it doesn't come out as that, does it? It doesn't. No. It's not an easy, straightforward answer to the conversation. This is what the research has really highlighted. You really see, God, tell me why you're shaking your head when I say that. So, I mean, I left with that message myself, you know?
One point that is really, for me, is remarkable, listening to the interviews of the people, that all of them have strategies and agreements they are aware of the depletion of the resources. Then they, in different levels, they start with the strategies to be able to conserve these resources. So, and the strategies have different levels. So of course, in bigger villages, it's difficult to control and more difficult to implement these strategies, but they have the willingness. So as Katie mentioned, some of them start planting aguaje in the gardens and things like that. In the indigenous communities inside protected areas, it's a bit easier, less people and more regulations. And so it's more difficult, it's easier to put control on some strategies for conservation. They decide, we won't harvest anymore in this area because we see that there is no much Mauritia fruiting right now. So at least what we get from these interviews of local people is that the people are willing to still living on these resources. And what the government needs to listen, because if they want to still living on these resources, that means that there is a completely economy based on this. And wherever they are, inside a protected area, outside a protected area, the country cannot just put on top of the projects, because they need first to listen to their priorities. And they already have a livelihood based on these resources. So what do we want to do for development for them? Probably first to listen what is development in these regions. And what do they want, and they're keen to do it sustainably, and they are aware. They say that we would like to learn climbing the palms, but please bring some equipment, please bring some training. So we need to start listening and pay more attention what they want as well.
No, I think
to conserve these places.
It's quite interesting. I went to COP26 in Glasgow, and actually there was a lot of that message is that many people know how to manage their land and actually be careful. Be careful really how you think about that. And I got that message very strongly. So I think this research reinforces that. So I guess we're coming a little bit towards the end. I mean, there's kind of two aspects I'd like to kind of pull out as we get to the end. One is, what role do the international partnerships play in this? And the second one is, what do you think, taking away from the Peruvian experience, if you will, that we should learn and we should take to other places around this sort of knowledge that you've learned? I'll turn to Katie to answer that first. Katie, what would you, international partnerships and take home beyond the people, cities around the world?
So specifically at this international partnership, we couldn't have done the work without it. Though I think we're now in a position where the team in Peru, Eudice can correct me if she doesn't think so, but I think the team in Peru is now very well skilled up, right, in all of this. They're developing the mapping expertise, the coring, the peat measuring, the hydrology, all the different techniques. It's all there to be able to take off without our with the UK involvement. In principle, right? I'm not saying they'd want to do it particularly, because it's great to work together. It's always, it's good to have collaborations and we learn from each other. But I think there's that capacity there now, which is really good, really nice, it's really good to see. And also enthusiasm about peatlands, which they seem to be maintaining, even though it's really hard to work in those places. Well, the question about
international
take-home
partnerships
messages.
and the sort of the take-home that you'd say to other people outside Peru from
Well, Eudice's point about listening to local communities is absolutely vital, because partly we've had this experience of the UN FAO interest in peatlands, and because their angle is very much on putting wasteland into production, right? We've kind of got this challenge of, okay, we need to make it very clear that peatlands everywhere. So here, Congo Basin is the other place where this is an emerging issue, because their peatlands are essentially pristine, like in Peru, used, but essentially pristine because they're not drained or used intensively or deforested. So we need to listen to what the people who live there and use the peatlands, and I think this applies to other ecosystems too, right? But peatlands are particularly important because of this disproportionate amount of carbon that they store. Yeah. So there's the kind of the double thing of, there's the local people's interests and what's important for them and their well-being, but also they're sitting on this amazing resource in terms of an ecosystem service, which has the potential to continue drawing down carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, helping to mitigate climate change. Yeah, do you see what I'm saying? So there's kind of a local scale issue and the global scale issue.
Yeah, local and global are linked, absolutely.
Totally.
Eurydice.
Yes, I would like to focus on 3 points. The first, this collaboration managed to keep us as a research group active on the topic, so keep studying peatlands. Second, was well support early career researchers who sometimes without these international projects it's difficult to keep, and sometimes we train a lot of people and then you need to see them leave, and it's great when they can stay with you and keep working and producing more information. And the third thing is the generation of the scientific knowledge that we didn't know before. We were thinking, degradation is just a few palms cutting here, cutting there. Now we have measured it, we know the consequences, the impacts that these activities have. Is having time as well to be able to get these little windows that sometimes open with the government, so they can listen to you about your results, and they might get interested, because right now peatlands are in every international conference, so they participate in this meeting and say, this researcher now is talking about peatland. Now, before I didn't listen, but now I will pay more attention. So you have these opportunities as well. When more funding comes, you keep researching on this, keeping these international collaborations, and then opportunities with the government to be able to talk and they can listen to you and learn as well, because you listen to them, they might say, we need more information about this. Okay, we will research on that, but listen please as well our results that we got until now, and put into action, because we need more policies to support conservation and sustainable management. Those are my 3 last points.
That's absolutely wonderful. But I think we leave on a very positive note. So it's been a wonderful conversation that's ranged across what is a great project. You see people as a central element of this. people as researchers, but also people who understand their land and the way to use it and keep its sustainability. The question of listening, but also really what international partnership can do on many different levels of bringing people together through science in order to drive global sustainability. So thank you very much to Eurydice and Katie for joining me in this conversation, and I hope those of you who are listening have enjoyed this. Thank you very much indeed.
Thanks for
Thanks very much. Thank you.